Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Happy New Year's Eve. I've had a little break and I am back, and I couldn't think of a better day to post a card that sums up my entire year. I did a card like this last year and someone has recently watched it and asked if I would be making another card like that this year. The answer is obviously yes. I already had it in the works and I can't wait to tell you what all of these things represent that happened this year. So just like at the beginning of all my other videos, I'm flicking through a lot of my stamp sets and I'm going through and pointing to all the ones that I wanted to use or thought I would use for this card. As you can see, there's a lot of stamp sets here, but that's because I used maybe one or two from each stamp set. I love to mix my old stamp sets with my new ones to come up with completely different scenes and stories. Once I had picked all my stamps, I put them all on my stamping platform and I stamped them using my black Memento ink on some scraps of white cardstock from other projects. So now on to colouring, and as always I use a mix of Copic markers and regular alcohol markers. Going in first with my lighter pen, adding a darker one for the shading and then blending them together. It's super easy and super simple and saves a lot of time, especially when you're using a lot of images like these cards. And speaking of cards like this, there is no way that I would expect someone to copy this design completely. I know that it's a bit random and everything might look like a bit of a mess together, but I promise I'll explain why I picked all these images very soon. But the idea behind this card was to go through all of my stamp sets, make a scene that's familiar to me. So this is my dining table at home where I do all of my card work, and each of these stamps symbolize either an event or something that happened this year that stood out to me. So anyone who would go with this theme would have a completely different card to the next person, which is so much fun. So if you're in a bit of a crafty slump or you don't know what card to start with next year, maybe you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, I highly recommend doing this. It's great for reflection because you can sit down and think about everything that you've done, that you've achieved, that you've gone through, and then turn it into something beautiful. So for me, I sat down and I wrote down all of the biggest events and the most exciting things and even the most stressful and wild things that happened during the year. I then went through all of my stamps and picked out which images I thought would match them best. And let's face it, it's always fun to go through your stamp stash and have a look at everything you've got. And while we're on the topic of this year, before it crosses over into the new year, I would love to know in the comments, what is the biggest thing you achieved this year? It doesn't even have to be that big. One of my achievements for this card that you're going to see is making sure the washing basket actually got emptied a few times. Mount Fold seems to have been a permanent feature in my house forever. The washing basket never seems to be completely empty, but I have managed to do that multiple times this year, so that's an achievement on this card. I feel like the last 2 years have been really hard and that a lot of us maybe aren't looking at the little things as big achievements. Sometimes it's hard to remember that even the smallest steps are still progress, and progress is moving forward. And before you know it, the gap between you and your goals is getting smaller and the distance from the start is way behind you. So even if you've only made small steps towards a bigger goal this year, I would love to know about that too, so that I can cheer you on for next year. Now that we're finishing up with our colouring, we're going to move on to white highlights. Today I've got a range of images, so I'm using my size 1, my 0.8 and my 0.5. And no matter how many times I do this, I still love how different it makes the images, how it makes them pop and just gives them a little bit more dimension. So here's something I don't normally show in my videos because I do worry that it's boring. No one wants to see images cut out. But I was asked in a comment on a previous video about my fussy cutting. So if you've been hanging around for a while, you may have heard that I am not on speaking terms with my scan and cut. Not long after I got it, I did an entire page of stamping and colouring, and I was really excited that I wouldn't have to cut everything out by hand, and that I was going to save a lot of money because I was buying the matching dies for all the stamp sets, and that gets really expensive, especially when the dies can be almost twice as much as the stamp set itself. But when I set my scan and cut to work, it totally destroyed the entire piece of cardstock with all my stamping and colouring. And after that, I really had a lot of trouble forgiving it. So we're still not on speaking terms. I will one day reconcile with that machine, but it might have to wait until we move house and I can be bothered setting it up again and trialing it out and getting it a new mat, calibrating the blade. It wronged me so bad that I just don't care to be kind to it right now. But anyway, my fussy cutting. I was asked how I do it so neat, which is a little bit funny because sometimes I do worry that it looks really rough, but I also get a lot of people say that they didn't know that I fussy cut and they assume that I use the dies. So I do take note of the amount of space that a die leaves around the edges, and I do try to replicate that. The neatness comes from my previous job. For those of you who don't know, I used to work in childcare, and I remember when I first started out, there was a lovely lady. She's still there. She was actually my son's teacher this year, Miss Sylvie. If you wanted to have anything to do with her displays, her photos that she put up, and they were the best in the centre too. They always stood out. They'd always be front and centre in the entry to the building. But if you wanted to help with that, you had to have good cutting skills, and she was very picky, and I don't blame her. It's her work, her name is on it, so when you're helping her, she wanted you to make sure that your skills were worthy of being in those displays. So I learned very quickly to cut around photos perfectly, cut around paragraphs about what the children were up to perfectly, and I guess throughout my 7 years in that centre, I then also had very high standards because of all the work I did with her while I was a trainee. And so I guess that stuck with me. I can sit with a pair of scissors in my hands for hours cutting out images if I have to. I actually really enjoy it. I find it very relaxing. That's why I'm not so stressed about buying all the dies. It's great for like the mice and the cats with their long tails and their whiskers that are really hard to maneuver around without bending the cardstock. But for the most part, I really enjoy it. I think it reminds me of just all those times I sat in a dark room while all the kids were sleeping and I was helping do all the paperwork. I can just zone out and think about nothing for a while. So onto my background, and I'm using the largest of the stitched rectangles to cut a cream piece of cardstock because the walls in our house are cream, and a grey piece that is just big enough for the flooring. I already had this black desk cut out of some cardstock from a long time ago. It is using the pop-up desk die. I was going to use it for a card a couple of months ago but changed my mind, so I had this in my stash ready to use. I've trimmed it down to, I guess, just look like a tabletop, as it's going to be flat on my card front rather than a pop-up piece. Here I am cutting a hole in the top of my box. I just cut along this line so that I can slip things in there and give it a bit more dimension. I was worried I would have a lot of trouble coming up with a sentiment for this card. I found my thanks stamp set and thought, well, I'll put thanks in it. And from my desk to yours, which I thought was very fitting, being a crafter who is followed and watched by a lot of other crafters. Believe me, if I could make almost 2,500 of these and send them all to you, I would. This year has been a lot of fun. My audience has grown. I've gotten to meet so many cool people. I've made heaps of new friends. Had lots of conversations and learned lots about people from all over the world, and for that I am very thankful. The crafting community, especially the card making community, is just so sweet and my favourite place to be. Okay, so here is where things are going to go quick and this whole card is going to come together right before our eyes. So first I'm gluing down my table, and this is going to be the dining table that I sit at every day to plan my cards and make them. This banner that I'm hanging up in the corner kind of just represents all the things that I have made for the house this year. I had to include a coffee mug because I cannot get through a day without my iced coffee. The cinnamon roll is here because I actually made time to start baking again this year, and I have loved every second of it and loved eating all of it too. I actually made a giant cinnamon roll from scratch, and it was one of my favourite things that I made all year. This little box that I'm putting together has a cake in it with 3 candles, and I thought that was a cute way to represent the fact that I turned 30 this year. I also have a little hamburger in there to symbolise that we gave up takeaway for a majority of this year. It saved us a heap of money. It was much better for us. We've been cooking like crazy. My husband has blown me away with his cooking skills this year. I actually prefer his food to mine. This little book here is coloured in like my planner that I have purchased for next year, which is really exciting because as soon as I had that planner in my hands, I started to feel like me again. Before I was into stamping, I was into planning, so I'm hoping to bring a little bit of that to this channel next year. This little house represents all the fun we had trying to find a house this year, and it didn't happen. We're obviously very hopeful for next year. We've got another 365 days where we will be looking for houses, putting offers on houses, and hopefully moving into a much bigger space for all of us. So I won't have to work at the dining table anymore. This little kiddo is Marzi, my daughter, and she looks exactly the same way that I coloured her for my favourite card this year. She's holding a little doll that represents my son, and they are both behind my chair, which is where they always seem to be. I've got my little phone here because I'm always filming on my phone. That is always in my hands, it's always on my desk. Here is that mount fold that I mentioned before. I have been very on to keeping this house in some kind of reasonable state this year, so I feel like that's something worth celebrating. The hand sanitizer is there for a different reason this year, and it's because I went viral a few days ago on TikTok. I went from just over 100 followers to about 22,000 within a few days, and the video that I put up that went viral has like 2.5 million views. I have no idea how it happened, why it happened. It doesn't affect my YouTube, it hasn't affected my Instagram, but I mean, it's a little bit of fun over there. The little airmail on my desk is for the orders that I sent from my Etsy shop overseas for the first time. Not a lot of people know, but I have ornaments that I hand make, and they were stocked in a cute little boutique in New York, which has just blown my mind. That is more exciting than going viral. The other little letter down here is for all of my projects that I made for hobby hoppers. It was my first year as a magic maker, the first year on a creative team, and honestly that has truly been one of the highlights. I couldn't not add a tiny car. My desk is always covered in Hot Wheels. Every time my son comes to talk to me, he's got like 3 or 4 cars in his hands, and one of them always seems to get left on my desk. Sometimes he likes to sit with me for ages, and he plays with all my scraps of paper to make little car parks for them. It's just really sweet. So here I am removing the backing to my double-sided tape because it is time to finish off this card. I line up my card base on the back of my card front, ensuring that it lines up nicely. And there we have it. This card is complete. My final card for 2021. It's a bit of a funny, weird, mismatched, chaotic scene, but all of these things on here mean so much to me. I am so incredibly grateful for everything that has happened this year, especially for you, for watching my things, for commenting on my videos even when I can't get back to you, for being my crafty friends, and just for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to see what 2022 brings us. I hope that next year is just completely magical for you. I wish you all the best for next year. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.